Hey everybody, I'm Chris Richardson and welcome to Gender, Race, and Media. So, this is the first time I'm doing this class. I'm very excited to get it going. It's going to be interesting, and if you've seen the syllabus or if you've seen some of the class materials already, you'll know that there's a superhero theme to this. I just want to address it today, and I want to address some of the things we're going to be doing and some of the texts we're going to be reading, and hopefully get you excited about this class. I think it'll be a really worthwhile endeavor, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So, for starters, we're obviously going to be talking about gender, race, and media. We're going to be defining those things. We're going to be making sure that we can kind of understand the context of these things. And to do that, I thought we'd do a really quick experiment right now. So I'm going to ask you weekly to do these weekly challenges. And that just means that you need to submit answers before Friday at midnight every week that we have classes. And that's regardless of whether you come to class, whether we have class in person, or whether we have class online or whatever. And if you make class, great. If you don't, if we have class, great. If we don't, whatever. All you need to do for participation, if you're getting graded, if you're registered in this class, you want to get full participation grades, is to make sure you do the weekly challenges. And the first weekly challenge, it'll have a few things you'll see on the site. The first one, though, I want you to do right now. Okay, so maybe write this down, use a pen and paper, use a, I don't know, whatever online app you're using. And I want you to describe a superhero, any superhero, doesn't matter who or what, any superhero. Take a moment, pause the video, because I don't want to make a bunch of space that, you know, if you've already done this or something. So pause the video right now. Okay, I'm hoping you paused the video and now you're back to it after writing down your description of your superhero. And now I want to ask you a few questions about this superhero. It can be, again, any superhero. And if you're one of these people that are like, you know, I don't read comic books, I don't really like the Marvel films, I don't even know any superheroes. First of all, bullshit, you know superheroes. Secondly, that's totally fine if you're not super into comics or pop culture even. I'm using it to talk about concepts in race, class, gender, sexuality, all the things that we're going to be covering. And I find that it's easier if we apply it to something. So as you'll see, I'm kind of applying it to Batman because that's really where sort of my fandom comes in. But you don't have to, and you don't need to know anything about Batman or any other superhero. But I'm sure you do know of Batman or Superman or whoever. So the superhero that you chose, who was it? And was it a man or was it a woman? Or could it be identified as something else? Think about that for a second. What race was this hero? So was this a white person? Was it a black person? Asian? What race, ethnicity does this person have? The interesting thing, at least one of the interesting things that I think we'll highlight throughout the course, is that you might have been thinking like, well, I didn't choose a hero based on gender or based on race, and that's fine. But you probably have a gender and race of this superhero. So it's one of those things that no matter what you're doing, it kind of crops into thought. And you might be thinking, well, I wasn't thinking again about race or gender or whatever. You weren't, but you can also answer those questions. And so on some level, at least on an unconscious, if not a conscious level, you are thinking about race and gender. We all are. It's sort of how we're conditioned in our societies, which is why we have this class, to think about it better, to understand it better. And so, what are the implications of that, right? Why do you think you chose the hero? Is it because it's the same gender that you identify with? Is it because it's the same race or ethnicity that you identify with? Is it because it's an opposite one or something like that, and then something that you like or that you're drawn to? There are a number of ways that we can start to unpack your choice. And I think it doesn't matter what you chose, but it's interesting that we can start to unpack that, right? And we can start to think about, well, how many of those do you have to choose from? So if you chose a white man, let's say Batman again, that's the one I'll be often referring to, and because, again, that's what I know the best. If you chose Batman, right, how many other white men superheroes do you have to choose from? Probably a lot, right? If you chose a black female superhero, cool, I wonder who it was. Also, how many are there to choose from? and you'll probably find that no matter what you know about popular culture, that number is a lot smaller, right? Why is that? And is that because it's a direct relation to our population? Probably not. If you look at the numbers, Nancy Ewan, who's a great writer, wrote Real Inequality, REEL. She notes that it's as likely, if you're watching media, pop culture, to find an alien as it is to find an Asian woman in the media, right? Think about that. There are definitely more Asian women in America, definitely in the world, than there are Martians or aliens. And yet you have an equal chance of finding those two groups, right? So that says something about our priorities, what we do, regardless of whether that was like a specific choice, which it probably wasn't, because there's a bunch of people making different stories, making different programs or novels or comics or whatever, and yet you have that number that we can still think about. And so, anyway, there's lots that we will unpack, and like I said, the theme of the class to address a lot of these issues will be superheroes. And so I'm actually going to ask you to, in the future, look into a superhero if you're choosing and do a little sort of review as if you were working for DC or Marvel or whatever studio you want to imagine, and ask yourself, what would I recommend? So what's the history of this superhero? What would I recommend in terms of adding? Maybe you want to add, maybe you think it needs more diversity, the superhero and his or her story. Maybe you think it needs to address certain themes that it hasn't, whatever. So I'll ask you to do a sort of report on a current superhero, any superhero, and that's a really broad concept. So if you're like, yeah, I don't read comic books and you're more of a historian, you could think, if you want, about a historical figure as a superhero. And so you can ask yourself, what representations of George Washington or someone, right, are there? And what would I recommend in terms of, producing more stories or more representations of this person and his or her world, right? Don't worry too much. Like I said, that's in the future, but that's an assignment. And then later you'll be designing your own. So I think hopefully this will be a cool assignment. It'll allow you to think about what's out there in the media, what you think should be out there in the media, where the differences are, what the implications are, right? Like, for example, things we'll be talking about. Is it better to address real-world issues and inequalities in, let's say, a superhero novel or, film or whatever? Or is it better to show an aspirational character, which to do, you might have to get rid of or at least kind of sidestep some of the actual inequalities that are there right now in order to show what it could be, right? So in other words, is it better to show a sort of realism, and these terms are problematic, we'll get into it, or is it better to show sort of aspirational heroes? Or maybe there's some kind of combination where you can address certain systematic or systemic inequalities, but also show sort of something to aspire to. I think a lot of the new movies and storylines try to do that. Maybe some are more successful than others, and those are things we're going to talk about. Anyway, I hope you are excited to do this. I have a few other challenges for you this week involving, stuff on the website that you'll see. I really do welcome your feedback as we develop this on a week-by-week basis. We'll see. I don't want anyone coming if they're sick, if we're holding class. I don't want anyone coming if, the choice is, do I take care of my aunt who's, in the hospital near me, or do I come to class? You take care of your aunt in the hospital, right? Like, you want to make sure that you are preserving your own health and the health of people around you. Then you make sure that you come to class or have discussion or whatever. So I just want to illustrate, it's really important. I was thinking, should I make a comparison about, like, we can all be heroes, and maybe later in the future or something, but I don't feel like getting into that now. I do want you, though, to think about, how do you want to represent yourself? How do you think people should be represented? These are the kinds of questions we're going to continue to ask. And of course, the superhero lends itself to that, with oftentimes masks, questions of identity, secret identity, powers, these kinds of things, and public image versus private image or private self, and these kinds of things, right? So it'll help you reflect on your own ideas, biases, beliefs, and it'll help you engage with the world by doing these kinds of activities in these classes and these discussions and stuff. So anyway, weekly assignments due before midnight on Friday. Readings are on the syllabus. We'll do Batman, like I said. We'll do my own work, which just came out on Batman and the Joker. We'll talk about that in terms of gender and sexuality for a minute. we'll talk about Deborah Whaley's great Black Women in Sequence, which is the other book that you should have an actual copy of. And then we will talk about a few other readings that you'll see, and if they're not one of those 3 books that you should physically have, then they are available for you as a PDF, and those are some excerpts that we'll also be reading. So look, it'll say the week, and it'll say the theme, and it'll say the reading. Pretty obvious. I'm sure you've all had a syllabus like that before. And don't forget to do the weekly challenge. I encourage you to reach out to me if you have questions. You can always set up an appointment. You can email me. You can also ask an anonymous question through the website. If you don't want to identify yourself, if you feel like, hey, I think this needs to be said, but I don't want to look like I'm criticizing you, or I don't want to look like I'm dumb by asking this question, you can do the Ask Me Anything question. That's anonymous, I promise. I think we are going to have fun in this class. I look forward to getting to know all of you and to seeing some of your answers to these questions on a weekly basis. I always check them. I don't necessarily grade them, as a, A or B or C or something. But in the end, I look back on them as well, and I give you a participation grade, so that's a major part of the class, as is the couple projects that we'll be doing, which you can work together, alone, separately, totally up to you. I encourage, collaboration, but if you are someone that wants to work on your own, totally acceptable. I think we're going to have fun in this class. I think we're going to start off comfortable, then we're going to get uncomfortable, then we're going to be more comfortable, and it'll be an interesting sort of ride along the way. As long as we remain respectful, that's the main thing. We'll talk about things like colorblindness, where people say, like, I don't see race, and the problems with that. And so what I find sometimes is that students kind of confuse like racism with race, or sexism with sex. And so it's not a solution. Like, you're not curing sexism by saying, I don't see sex or gender, right? You're not curing racism by saying, I don't see race. So we do want to talk about these things. And there's a difference between saying, this person represents the Black community in this way, in this show, for example, and saying something stereotypical, like all Black people do this, right? Those are the nuances, they're not even nuances, right? They're just distinctions in how we talk about things. So we'll practice. And as long as we come from a place of sort of good intentions, right? I think that's the main thing. So I don't want to be overly critical of people. If you don't know all of the catchphrases that people are using in certain discourses, it's totally fine. As long as you're not trying, as long as you're not consciously being offensive, I think we can deal with whatever we have to share. And I hope that we can all grow. I know we can all grow and become better people, better citizens, perhaps better activists if we want to. It's going to be a cool class. Look forward to sharing it with you. Make sure you come back regularly to check this. Make sure you don't hesitate to ask me questions if you have any. And I'll see you next week. I look forward to seeing your responses and talking a little bit more about heroes. Take care.